Good evening, church. Good to see all of you here tonight. I know you're out there in Cyberland, eagerly awaiting step one on the recovery process. That's what we're going to cover tonight. In our Recovery in Grace class, we're going to be looking at the very first step of Alcoholics Anonymous and their program. As I shared with you in the overview last week, the steps of AA, the program of AA, is probably the premier faith-based program for recovery. But I want to expand our concept on that. And by recovery, I'm not just talking about folks who are seeking recovery from drugs and alcohol. Obviously, that's an important issue. But we're seeking recovery from any life-controlling issue, which is one of the reasons that codependents go to Al-Anon and they study the 12 steps, because they too are seeking recovery. So I want to broaden your perspective a little bit on what recovery is. And to do so, we're going to start with step one here, which is a central issue for all of us, all believers. And that is to admit that we are powerless over, now on your screen there, we have a little blank. Of course, AA had alcohol there, but you could also put drugs of various sorts. You could put sex, you could put shopping and retail therapy, you could put food, you could put all kinds of things that are life-controlling issues that our lives had become unmanageable. Two things I want to break down for you initially, and then we'll discuss it. First of all, we have to admit that we're powerless. Now, this is a tough thing for me to do. In fact, my natural conditioning insists that my worth as a person is directly connected to my ability to control you, myself, my circumstances, my situations, everything around me. In other words, we're all naturally born little control freaks trying to figure out how we're going to control our world to meet our needs. We're going to talk more about that here in a little bit. But the point is, it makes it very, very difficult for us to admit to ourselves, much less to somebody else, that we're actually powerless. Because deep down inside, we don't believe we're powerless. Now, that's what's so hard about this first step, is we don't really believe that we're powerless, so we find it almost embarrassing in some respects to have to admit that we have no control, that we are powerless over whatever issue it is we're dealing with, whether it be alcohol and drugs or whether it be money issues. It could be a whole host of life-controlling issues. You just plug in whatever issue is troubling you. And first step is to admit you're powerless over that issue. And I think I shared, I can't remember what broadcast it was that I shared this on, but there was a lady who was trying to quit smoking that came and talked to me. And she came to the point where she was finally willing to admit that she was powerless. She came to me at a break in a conference one time and said she was totally distraught. She said, "I'm not even sure I'm really a Christian, et cetera, et cetera." And I, upon further questioning, discovered that what she was trying to do was to quit a cigarette addiction. And my first question to her was, "Have you tried?" And she said, "Of course I've tried. I've been trying desperately to quit." And she was not able to quit and realized beyond a shadow of a doubt that she was powerless. Now, that was a good place for that lady to be in, a really good place, because it set her up for the advice that I gave her. I told her when she went home to ask God if he wanted her to quit. You see, she came to understand that she had no control over this addiction of hers. She had no control. Even though she wanted to quit, she couldn't quit. But another issue that goes along with powerlessness is that we have to rely on somebody besides ourselves. And that's another issue that makes it difficult for us to admit that we are powerless, because we'll have to turn our life over to somebody else, as we'll see later on in the third step. But for right now, we're focusing in on this issue of admitting that we're powerless. Now, I want to give you some biblical examples of folks who had to admit they were powerless. It's not an unusual thing as far as the scriptures are concerned. Going back as far as the father of the Jewish nation, Abraham, old Abe had to admit he was powerless when God made that unconditional covenant with him. There was a blood covenant signed by God himself in Genesis 15, whereby Abraham was not able to do anything but watch and listen to what God said he was going to do. He was forced in a way to become powerless in that establishment of that covenant. 400 years later, Moses at the burning bush recognized that he too was powerless. And that, in fact, when God had called him to deliver the children of Israel out of Egyptian bondage, one of his statements to God was, "I can't do it." And the reason he couldn't was because 40 years earlier, he tried to do it on his own. He tried to deliver them and failed miserably. He came to understand he was powerless before he was used of God in a miraculous way. King David, the man after God's own heart, also demonstrated his powerlessness over his lust for Bathsheba. In the story of David committing adultery with Bathsheba, perjury, and actually murder to cover his tracks for that, came to understand in his Psalm of Repentance, Psalm 51, that he was absolutely powerless. He cried out to God, "Restore in me a clean spirit, a new heart, renew in me a clean spirit." So he also came to understand he was powerless. So the biblical record in the Old Testament proves beyond a shadow of a doubt that anybody who expects to recover in this lifestyle must always come to a place where they admit they're powerless. Likewise in the New Testament. The Apostle Peter, for instance, he boasted that he was the greatest in the kingdom. He boasted that he would go with Jesus to the death if it came to that, and found himself not 2 or 3 hours later denying that he even knew Jesus. So he too became powerless. He too understood and realized that he was absolutely powerless. The Pharisee, Saul, who later became Paul, the apostle, knocked off his horse at midday by a brilliant light, and blinded by that light, came to understand that he too was powerless. And even 20 years later, or thereabouts, he writes in Romans chapter 7, "What I want to do, I can't do. What I don't want to do, I wind up doing." That's an admission of being powerless that's best expressed by his little well-known prayer, "O wretched man that I am, who shall deliver me?" I can't deliver myself. I can't cause myself to recover. Who's going to do it for me? So the need for powerlessness, an attitude of powerlessness for recovery, is abundantly illustrated all the way through the scriptures. But notice also, we're not just admitting we're powerless over whatever issue controls us, but that our lives have become unmanageable. In other words, not only are we powerless to control this particular issue, but our lives are completely out of hand. Now, unfortunately for a lot of us, there are circumstances that God allows for us to go through that actually teach us that lesson. As a matter of fact, when I work with those folks in recovery from drugs and alcohol in a program, the very first phase of that program, the orientation phase, I would frequently ask these men, I'd say, "Why did you come here? What brought you here? What caused you to realize your need for recovery?" And of course, they gave me a whole list of things, beginning with the fact that they had financial problems, they ran out of money, They couldn't pay their bills. They lost their car, their transportation, whatever. They had health problems. Many of them suffered from the lack of dental health. That's a common problem among drug addicts and alcoholics. They had health problems that were brought about because of the abuse of drugs and substances. They had legal problems. Some of them were even wanted by the law and were even court ordered to the program, saying you either go to a program or we're going to put you in jail. And of course, all of them had some degree of relational problems. Their families didn't want them around any longer. They didn't have any kind of hope of maintaining a relationship. Their wives had kicked them out. Their kids wouldn't talk to them, et cetera, et cetera. Now, these are all indicators of the fact that our lives are unmanageable, that we all need recovery. Now, it's important just to interject quickly at this point that knowing that you need recovery and actually wanting recovery are two different things. So in step one, even though you might realize you need recovery, you still have an issue of wanting recovery, and that is what admitting that we're powerless really speaks to. Now, one other thing I want to mention here before we go to discussion tonight, and that is that this tendency that we all have to seek to control our own lives and to deny the reality of our lives becoming unmanageable is something that runs deep in the heart of every individual. It's not just drug addicts and alcoholics, people with substance use disorders. It's all people across the board. All of us have this common tendency to deny reality and that we don't like and to project on other people. So a lot of times you'll hear folks, for instance, say, well, I thought it was normal to have 2 or 3 DUIs. Or what's wrong with spending half your paycheck at the bar before you go home on Friday night when you've got bills to pay? Doesn't everybody take a shot of whiskey before they go to their son's ball games? I mean, people in denial began to distort reality, deny and distort reality for a very specific way. Because admitting that we're powerless and our lives are unmanageable is a difficult thing for us to do. And we would much rather deny the reality of our powerlessness or the reality of our lives being unmanageable than to have to admit that. But admitting it is the first step. It's the first step of recovery. It's the first step of living a new lifestyle. And by the way, as we'll define as we go on in our study, recovery is not just abstinence. And nobody that I know of likes abstinence. Abstinence is a real pain. There's nothing pleasant about abstinence. And so if you equate recovery with abstinence, you'll never come to the point where you want it. You might realize you need it, but you won't really want it. You see, the way I define recovery is that it's a brand new lifestyle, a lifestyle that is more satisfying to you than the previous lifestyle you had. So as we go on in recovery, we've got to realize one other thing, and that is this step one, like all the other steps, is going to be done daily. We don't just admit that we're powerless over whatever our issue is and that our lives are unmanageable one time. We do that to begin with, but we learn to do that daily, because really what we're trying to do is satisfy our own needs. That's where this desire for power and control comes from within us. You see, we are personal beings as well as physical beings. And just as we have needs on a physical level, food, air, water, we have needs on a personal level as well. And those personal needs, I simply summarize them all with the term a need to be worthy. Those personal needs for love and respect, to know that we're secure and significant, those personal needs drive us just as surely as our physical needs do. In fact, Jesus used the terms describing our physical needs to illustrate our personal. He said, if any man hunger or thirst, let him come unto me. Now, when he said hunger and thirst, he wasn't talking about food and water. He was talking about this deep hunger we have in our soul every day to know that we are secure in unconditional love. And that's this thirst that we have every day for a sense of significance, to know that we're important. So that drive for love and respect is what we're trying to accomplish by refusing to let go of our control. In other words, we want to control ourselves, our people, our environment, our situation, our circumstances, to make sure that our personal needs are met, to make sure that we are secure, we are significant. We want to control things around us. So when it comes to admitting that we have no control, when it comes to admitting that we're powerless, it's a difficult thing for us to do. And very often it requires a litany of problems in our unmanageable lives for us to ever come to the point where we realize that we must admit to ourselves, if not to God and others, that we are in fact powerless and our lives have become unmanageable. But here's the good news. Once we've admitted we're powerless, there's a sense of relief that goes with that. When you realize that you are not in charge, you are not in control, and your life is totally unmanageable, there's a sense of relief from having to make it happen. It's kind of like a thing I read one time years ago. I had a little day timer that had little witticisms written on it for each day. And one day I read it, and it said, for peace of mind, resign as the general manager of the universe. In other words, realize you're not in charge, realize you're not in control. It will give you a strange sense of peace when you give up that effort to control your life, to satisfy your own needs. Jesus said, if you're hungry or thirsty, come to me, because he's the only one that can truly satisfy those needs. And in order to come to him, we're going to have to give up our own program. So at this point, what I want us to do now is to bring our other participants in tonight, have a little discussion, have each one of them share with you a little bit about their own experience with power and control in their lives and the willingness to give that up. Tonight, we've got, of course, our main host here, Bill Lloyd. He's with us. And Pam. Pam is the director of Wits In Resources for Women. We've got Tom Bimbo, my neighbor up the road a little bit. And we also have Bob Jernigan, who, by the way, Bob, congratulations on your master's degree.
Thank you. I appreciate that.
Graduated. So sorry we couldn't have a graduation ceremony, but
Well,
ranch will graduate you.
All right, that'll work.
Yeah. So let's start by talking about this step one here, this necessity of giving up, of admitting that we're powerless and our lives have become unmanageable. How do you see that, Pam, in your experience?
Yes.
Pam.
I feel like I should say my name's Pam and I have a daily reprieve. Thank you for inviting me. When I hit my bottom, and as you pointed out, that varies from person to person what that might be. My first bottom happened to be chemical. This idea of powerlessness was unfathomable to me. And one of the reasons that I actually was willing to admit that in my case, I had a chemical addiction was because I, in general, am such an incredibly strong-willed person. It's been said about me for as long as I can remember that if willpower can get the job done, I can get the job done. And I had tried for so long, in my case, not so much to quit drugs and alcohol, but to get a manageable life. When I tell my story, I tell people I came in on the unmanageability part of the first step. And
Right.
I think a lot of people do, but they maybe don't relate to it as much as I did. I had changed jobs, I'd changed states, and I'd changed husbands. And my life hadn't changed. I was still a train wreck. And so this was the last stop for me. And when I discovered that I really could not quit, I got what it meant to be powerless. The way I talk about it is that unmanageability is the outward manifestation. It's what shows from the powerlessness. And you were talking about that. A lot of times you will hear people in 12-step programs say, this is a program for people who want it, not for people who need it.
Yeah, exactly.
And you heard that one? Yeah. And my response to that is, well, I don't think so, because a lot of people, starting with me, who came into the program, in my case, I didn't want to get sober. I wanted my life to stop being so unmanageable. So my way of putting it is that this program is not a program for people who want it. It's a program for people who are willing to do it. My definition of want to is that it's a feeling. My definition of willing is that it is a choice. I don't have to feel like it. I can still make a choice to do it. Thanks.
That's a good point, Pam. That's an excellent point. Most people, I think, in a recovery and a desire for a change in lifestyle, and from whatever unmanageable life they have, because their life is unmanageable. So I think everybody starts out with needing recovery. In fact, across the board, everyone sooner or later is going to realize they need recovery. And they don't start out wanting recovery. In fact, most of the people I've talked with over the years have wanted a better lifestyle while they were drunk. In other words,
Exactly.
a better lifestyle stoned. They wanted to be able to do the normal lifestyle, with their dysfunction. They wanted to carry it on. They wanted to go on womanizing, or they wanted to go on as in their sexual addiction and live a normal life. So it wasn't about wanting to quit whatever issue it was. It was their lives had become unmanageable and they had to do something. What do you have to say about it, Bill?
I think it's a very cultural thing. The way I was brought up is that was an evil. It was a big sin to be powerless. I grew up in a town and I played football. And I was thinking about it. Like there was a weight limit when we were kids in Pop Warner, and the coaches put us on these regiments, and we had to be disciplined and we had to do all these things. And that was my mindset. Patton was one of my heroes. So you grow up, and there was this deep core belief that I had that only the strong people deserve to be loved. Only the strong are loved. So admitting powerlessness was hard. But I think if we're going to seek Him and we're going to try to be like Christ, then we're going to see how powerless we are. And that was kind of, my case, all sorts of dysfunction, codependency, sexual dysfunction. And I had had enough. And I was around Alpha Ministries, and being in classes and things like that, I saw people that were working the steps, and they had something that I wanted. So the first thing the first thing my sponsor asked me is, what aren't you willing to give up to get better? And I named two things, and I lost two people, and I lost them both. But but I remember you said, John, that you get some instant relief when you come and you admit that you're powerless. You get some instant relief. And I think the other thing I was thinking about when you said that abstinence is not recovery, when I went through, recent tragedy, I saw that brokenness wasn't transformation, So that first step that we take, it's a relief, but there's 11 more. But the one thing that I thought about, there's a really good movie out, Changing Lanes, and Samuel Jackson plays a recovering alcoholic, and he just like stirs up all this crap during the day, fighting Ben Affleck because he cut him off and made him late for his appointment. So I mean, the day went like down fast. So Samuel Jackson calls his sponsor, and the sponsor's kind of giving him the what for, chewing him out. And Samuel Jackson says, "Well, I didn't drink." And he says, "You didn't drink? Do you think that's what this is all about?" He said, "You're addicted to chaos."
Right.
So he stirred it up, and I really think that what I found to be true is I'm addicted to my own thinking, and that's why I need a constant renewing of the mind. But I did get a lot of relief when I knew that I was powerless, because in my sense, I could stop trying so hard.
Yeah, because you're out of control. I mean, when you finally admit that, there is a relief to that, because it's also an acknowledgement of truth. Even though we don't believe it, we're not in control. Of our lives that we were, and so it's kind of a relief when you come to the truth of the matter.
Yeah.
Bob, what do you have? Oh, go ahead, Bob. Bill.
Yeah, I'm just saying that one of the tricks of it all too is that when we know God and we figure, okay, we have God with us and on our side, because I was a Christian for 13 years before I went through the step. Well, I should know better. I have God, so I should do better. I should know better. And the powerless people, they're over there, but I have God, and He told me all these things, so I should do better. And that's not the way it works.
No, I asked some of my first Alpha classes. I had 12 drug addicts or alcoholics every 6 weeks in a reentry program, and I'd ask them every time. Every time I'd ask them, and want a show of hands, how many of y'all went to Sunday school when you were a kid and grew up in church? And invariably, 10, 11 out of the 12 would raise their hands, So, we can substitute that religious stuff in there, and we'll talk more about that later on. Bob, why don't you chime in a little bit?
I just had to unmute there. A lot of thoughts going through my head as I was listening to you, John, and what Pam and Bill shared too. It becomes almost like a barometer of how surrendered that I am in a given moment based on how much anxiety I'm experiencing or not a given moment. It's like an inverse proportion there, because when I get started wrapped up in thoughts or worries and then trying to figure out how I'm going to take care of this, that, and the other, there's a tension that comes with that. When I let that go, when I just release that to God, then there's a peace that comes in that. And I wish it would just stay there. But what happens is the flesh kicks in and I find myself anxious again. And what it is, I'm back to obsessing about how I'm going to control things again.
All right.
It is a daily, like you said, it's a daily choice And like you said, Pam, we get to decide each day and multiple times a day, am I going to be, in charge of all this, or am I going to trust God to take care of it? Perhaps give me the part that He wants me to take care of. But as a woman in a class I was doing one night said, she said she came to the realization that she just needed to let God be God. And that's so simple, but so profound.
Yep, exactly. And I think one of the things we all go through, and every individual I know that enters into recovery has to go through it. It's hard to let go of something until you grasp something else. So I don't want people to take this out of context and think because we're doing one step a week that they are isolated. These steps are not isolated. There are 12 principles that describe a lifestyle that work together. And, of course, the next two steps we'll be talking about is not only coming to believe that a power greater than ourselves can restore us to sanity, but also turning our will and our life over to His care, and that on a daily basis as well. So, lest you get the idea that you can just do step one, keep in mind it's one step, like you said, Bella. There's 11 more. Okay, so keep that in mind, and we'll try to integrate them as we go on with it. Tom, what do you have to share with us?
Well, I actually wrote down Bob's comment of "let God be God." I thought that was a pretty good way to put it. I've always had a problem with my job description. I always thought it was my job to do God's job and God's job to do some other job, but not certainly be in charge of my life. And, I was kind of like Pam had said, I was one of these people that I reached a certain level of success in my life because I just decided to work harder, get up earlier, put in more effort. And, even if it was by hook or by crook, I would figure out a way to win and get what I wanted. So it was very difficult for me to, and Bill also said culturally, we're in that culture. So
Right.
Other people would fully agree with that was the right attitude to have. So it was very difficult to break that down. But I remember an experience I kind of had with kids, and you might have had similar experiences, you guys out there, that, I remember when my kids were little, they got to a point, like learning to tie their shoes. You would try to help them and they'd say, no, I can do it myself. And they would, that attitude is I can do this. I'm in charge. And really down beneath that was, I'll be okay if I can show you, Daddy, that I can tie my shoes myself. And of course, naturally, when they did do that, we would reward them with,
Sure.
with accolades. So, we've instilled that in culturally, but it's also, I believe, in there as a component of the mind of the flesh. And if the audience out there doesn't fully understand what we're talking about, just hang in there. We will get there when we talk about the mind of the flesh. But part of that mind of the flesh is that, I'm in control of my life. Thank you very much. And God, I'll call you if I need you. But for right now, I got things under control.
Right.
So pretty much let me do it myself. And so I think we come by that culturally, as you guys have described, and we also come by that very honestly as naturally born children, in the flesh.
Did you ever try to pull a splinter out of your own finger? I remember getting this splinter. It was real deep, and I thought, okay, I'm going to count to 3, and then I'm going to jerk it out, and I knew it was going to hurt, because it's ragged and everything. And so I'd go 1, 2, 3. My finger would go with it. I couldn't separate it. And I think that's the way we tend to look at, giving up power and admitting that we are powerless. I think, I forget who it was that said, I'm powerless over being powerless.
Yeah.
I'm powerless, so it's one of those strange kinds of experiences that we've all had. I think because we're all born, like you said, Tom, with a natural desire of the flesh. The flesh is that old nature, and that nature is wired and programmed for survival. And when we tie our personal needs into it, all of us have a set of personal needs that have to be met. I mean, we can't live without that sense of love and respect. We can't live without that sense of security and significance. We'll die a personal death, and that will lead to relational death. And so it's a desperate thing that begins in childhood, that we have got to be in charge. And that works well for quite a while in our lives. But sooner or later, our lives become unmanageable. And I think that's why, Pam, you were talking about us entering into recovery because of an unmanageable life, and not because we wanted to give up whatever power over whatever we were exercising power over.
John, I'd like to touch
Go
on
ahead.
something else. When you were talking about the security and significance, Bill mentioned Changing Lanes, which is one of my all-time most favorite movies. It was required in my program for people to watch that. And the line that Bill quoted is my favorite line. And he says, alcohol isn't your problem anyway. You're addicted to chaos. And I never heard it put so succinctly that my experience, and I didn't understand it at the time, you taught it to me, that I actually used that chaos, that drama, that unmanageability as an anesthetic for the emptiness on the inside of me.
Right.
And when it stopped and I really had to feel that, some of us are sicker than others. I actually remember vividly, I had a form of PTSD. And when that would happen and I would start feeling that emptiness, I would do what back then I called plug in a tape. And I would start at the beginning of some horrific night in my life. And I would start at the beginning and I would play it all the way through in my mind until I got that chemical dump in my brain that kind of drama and chaos gave me. That I was addicted to my own brain chemistry. I would play it until I got that chemical dump.
All right.
So that I could feel better. Giving that up took me a whole lot longer than drugs and alcohol because I carried it in my brain all the time. I've struggled with it more since we've been in lockdown.
Yeah.
I didn't ever realize that until just this second, that I've had more memories, I've had more dreams, I've had more. That's what I'm doing because I'm bored.
Yeah. You're trying to bring some chaos to give you a little relief. Another form of that is an addiction to that adrenaline rush. And that's referred to, folks with PTSD will often become addicted to that. They call it a dinosaur dump because it's a brain chemistry change in the primitive brain of the brain stem that actually gives you that surge of adrenaline and changes in chemistry that you're used to in chaos. And so you need that chaos, to have that. And it becomes, if you're not in chaos, you're going to make chaos. And that actually happens to a lot of folks. Becoming powerless will somehow threaten that chaos dump, that dinosaur dump in our chaos. And if we say, I'm not under control, we want to let go of that. I don't want to let go of that. I don't want to get better because I know that I can feel like the changes this in this form, this lifestyle. So, Bill,
Yeah,
add there.
yeah. The powerless thing is I remember when we were processing about Liam, and you asked me, you said, are you mad at God? Are you angry with God? I said, no, I'm mad and angry with myself. And you said, that's because you think you're God, And I think it was Bill Gillum said there's one God and 6 billion wannabes. I think the deal we kind of try to make with God, we say, okay, God, we know that you're in control, but that must be really tough. So I'll just control this little part of the universe. My little,
Right.
I'll control, and if I get in trouble, I'll call on you. If I get in
Right.
trouble, I'll call on you, and then you come help me out. But I got this, God, and it's those kind of things that we do. And what Pam was saying, I remember I had a kid in my program who had an alcoholic family, and it got really bad to where they had to be pulled out of there. And the first day back in group, when she went and was living now in a peaceful environment, right? She was actually bright enough to, insightful enough to recognize herself. She couldn't sit still after a while, and she was getting up, and she'd stir things up, and she'd start fights and things like that. But she recognized it. She goes, this peace and quiet, I can't take it. I can't, and so recognizing that, helped her to get some more help. And so it's a process. This is a process. Because I remember going through step one, getting some relief, and then really struggling until when I did step four, got some more relief, step 4 and 5, so it is a process, but admitting it and really asking God to show you, what does it mean to be powerless? And
Right.
where am I thinking that I do have power, and control?
Exactly.
Probably every area, but there are areas that, we give up on, but we might latch on to something or someone else to control too.
Oh yeah, and I appreciate you saying that, Bill. That it's a process. We're just beginning tonight with step one. To look at that process, and we're going to, as we go through, when we go to step 2 next week, we won't forget step 1, because as I said, it's a daily kind of thing. What we'll be doing is adding principles here, and in this package and description of recovery, we'll be adding important principles listed out in the 12 steps for what a recovery life really looks like, what it really feels like.
Yeah, Bobby Hayes, Bobby Hayes taught the 12 steps at New Life. He says that he has coffee every morning with the Lord, and he sits in the seat of powerlessness. He actually has a chair, and he calls it the seat of powerlessness. So he reminds himself every morning, of step 1. And he's yeah.
Good. Tom, let's go around and just do a closing thought here, and we'll quit for this evening. So, Tom, what comes to your mind?
Well, again, that seat of powerless is really important, because just like every morning we wake up in need of our personal needs for security and significance, and that's nothing to be ashamed of. That's just reality. That's the way we're made. Just like hunger and thirst, that need has to be met every day. But also we have to remind ourselves that we have to be powerless, so that we can let God be God, and then we can receive that security and significance, and know that our needs are met, and then we can ask, all right, so what do I do today? What's the plan today? What are we doing today, Lord?
Exactly. It starts with that sense of powerlessness and admitting
Right.
we need it. Bob?
So following Christ, it's counterintuitive because we do, like you said at the beginning, John, we are control freaks in the flesh, and following Christ is about letting go. It's about trust, and having that faith is the opposite of the cultural way that we've been raised to be in charge and pull ourselves up by our bootstraps and take power and have strength and, you know, grind our way through. And it's the opposite of that. It's letting that go, allowing him to fill that space within us, that empty space. And there's rest in that. There's peace in that. And once we get a taste of that, it is easier to go back to that once we fall back into trying to be in control. I think over time, as the process unfolds, we get a little better at recognizing it quicker, hopefully, and going back to that state of surrender.
Yeah. I think that's good word. Pam? Changing lanes. I want to look
Asking
at
you
it.
shall receive.
If anybody's interested, not only does Samuel Jackson play just the quintessential alcoholic role, but the role that Ben Affleck plays in this movie is possibly in some ways more powerful than even the one that Samuel Jackson plays, because Ben Affleck plays the lawyer who has it all and is still empty. Very, very good. That's
All right.
That's it
So
for
that's
me.
our homework assignment. Go to Netflix and look up Changing Lanes, right?
if you haven't
Watch
seen it.
that. That'd be a great homework assignment, by the way. And yes, I appreciate your comment about Ben Affleck's role in the lawyer who had it all together, but is totally empty. That underscores the whole message of this Recovery and Grace series is the fact that we all have need for recovery. There isn't anybody that doesn't need recovery as a healthy lifestyle.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I mean, I believe, you know, the whole world is in need of recovery, you know, and Christians might put it in different language that everybody needs a savior, but it's the same thing. And for me, the powerlessness part is something that I have to realize, you know, and understand, you know, every single day. You know, I have to remember that because it's learning to live in paradox, because it doesn't mean that we sit still.
All right.
It doesn't mean that, you know, we do nothing. So learning to kind of that paradox with God's kingdom, where weakness is power, you know, and power is made, you know, perfect in our weakness. That goes totally against what we think is normal, and totally against, I guess, human nature. I guess it's part of the fall. But that paradox of knowing when I'm weak, he is strong. That sounds good, but how does that look every day, you know, in life?
Right.
So, and again, for me, it's been trial and error, and God's taught me every time. You know, he just continues to teach and teach and teach. And when the student is ready, the teacher appears. You know, there's things that he brought into my life, that truths that I wasn't ready for, but when I was ready, he brought them. You know.
Right.
And I think he holds us up more than we even realize. You know,
Yeah.
even though we don't admit we're powerless, he's holding us up more than we realize.
Even though we don't admit we're not in control, we're not in control. So,
Yeah.
Well, I appreciate you guys being here tonight. I appreciate each one of you contributing.
Just
We've got a few announcements here. Bill, you want to go over them?
yeah. This Thursday, Tom and we haven't talked about it yet, but I'm sure the Spirit's been putting it together. We're going to start the relational empowerment class following on the heels of the Alpha series. And we had a good follow-up on the Alpha series last Saturday. No, we did that Friday night, right? When did we do that? It doesn't matter. So we're heading that way to do the relational empowerment. And we are also looking at other online avenues to teach and study and bring. I was thinking about it today, John, bringing back the old Grace Nugget where you just do a
Yep.
5-10 minute little, blitz. So we definitely want to continue reaching out. So that'll be Thursday night, and sometimes we might just be spontaneous as well.
Right. Yeah.
You're going to be meeting Sunday. We're kind of getting back into the groove.
Yeah, we get back into the groove again. This Sunday, of course, we're going to be doing a special Memorial Day kind of celebration, remembering those who are. I don't know if Memorial Day and celebration really go together. Memorial Day, I know people think of being a time for barbecues and family gatherings and that sort of thing, but actually the real heart and intent of Memorial Day is to remember those who have made the ultimate sacrifice for our freedoms, and we're gonna be talking about that this Sunday, as well as having our regular service. So we encourage you to again follow the leadership of the Spirit, to follow what He's telling you to do. If He tells you don't need to get out of the house yet, don't get out of the house. If He's telling you to come on out and join in the fellowship, come on. We're here. We welcome you. So the most important thing, most critical thing, as always, is what is God telling you to do? And we want to reinforce that. So we will be having services this Sunday as well. And we will be increasing our online presence as the Lord directs and leads us. I talked to Pam this last Sunday about doing very excellent teaching on what's called the Bottle family, and maybe integrating that as part of our Power to Love class that you all will be beginning this Thursday night. So I think it'll be excellent. You guys are thumbs up with each other.
Whoa, wait a minute. Did you say this Thursday?
No.
No, not for you, Pam.
Okay, thank you.
You don't have to be ready this Thursday, okay?
No.
Tom and Bill are going to start the relational empowerment class this Thursday, but somewhere in that process where it's appropriate, we want to hear from you about the Bottle family. And so I want to keep in mind also the activities going on over on the coast there with Reach Ministries. What's going on with you guys, Bob?
Well, we've been pretty powerless. Able to go back to Archie's. We don't know when and if we are. That's, we don't know. We've been blessed. We've been meeting at the newer Causeway Cove Marina on South Beach. And we've had 3 services there now. And that's going pretty good, but we're looking for our more permanent home, and we'll see what God's going to do.
All right. We'll keep it in prayer.
Thank you.
Well, I appreciate you guys being here. Anybody else have anything before we quit tonight?
No.
Thank you.
Thank you, John. Thanks for that word. Thanks for everyone for joining in. We're putting some names up there, people that are watching. And remember, if you have any questions, just you can type them in the comments, but you can message on Facebook. You can go to into the message box. We check that pretty much on a daily basis. We're checking to see if there's any questions or needs out there. And I have sent some material out to people that asked for it. So that way you can, ask for things and send us your email address. So
also, all of these classes are on the Alpha Ministries website. They're all posted there, alphaministries.org. You can go there and pick up any of the messages that have been online from anyone at any time. So keep that in mind as well.
On YouTube too, your YouTube channel, it streams to that. All right, everyone. Good night.
See you guys.
Good night.
Thank you.